The approach. The stars bent and twisted as 10,000 warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The massive fleet stretched across space like a dark cloud, each vessel bristling with weapons that had conquered worlds across the galaxy. At the center of this armada sat the command ship Eternal Glory, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest vessels in the fleet. High Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed at the tactical display. His purple skin gleamed under the bridge lights, and his 6 eyes studied the readouts with satisfaction. For 300 years, the Zephyrian Empire had expanded across the galaxy, bringing civilization to primitive worlds. This would be conquest number 848. Report. Kethvar commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. Commander Yethlos stepped forward, consulting his datapad.
Sir, we have successfully entered the target system.
All ships report ready status. The planet designated as Earth shows exactly what our intelligence predicted. Kethvar nodded. The intelligence reports had been thorough. Earth was a backwater world inhabited by a species that had barely learned to split atoms. Their most advanced ships used chemical rockets, technology so primitive it was almost amusing. The humans had managed to put a few small stations in orbit around their world, and had even landed on their moon, but they were clearly centuries behind galactic standard technology. What about their military capabilities? Kethvar asked. Minimal, sir, Yethlos replied. They appear to have nuclear weapons, but delivery systems are crude missiles that would be useless against our shields. We detected no energy weapons, no plasma cannons, no antimatter devices. Their largest ships are tiny transport vessels used for moving materials between their planet and moon. Kethvar allowed himself a small smile. Every conquest started the same way. First, they would analyze the target world and catalog its defenses. Then they would approach and demand surrender. Most civilizations were smart enough to submit when faced with the might of the Imperial fleet. Those that refused were quickly shown the error of their ways. The Admiral walked to the main view screen, where Earth appeared as a small blue dot in the distance. Such a pretty little world, with its white clouds and blue oceans. It reminded him of his own home planet before the Empire had turned it into a fortress world covered in metal and concrete. Sir, called Navigation Officer Zeftar from his station, we are detecting some artificial structures throughout the system. Appears to be mining operations on several asteroids and small outposts on some of the planets. Expected, Kethvar said with a wave of one hand. Primitive species always start by strip mining their local space before they learn proper resource management. Are any of these installations armed? Negative, sir. All appear to be purely industrial. We're picking up basic electromagnetic communications between the facilities, but nothing that suggests military coordination. Kethvar nodded. The humans were exactly what the intelligence reports had described, a young species that had just begun to explore their local star system. They would be perfect candidates for integration into the Empire, once they learned to accept their place in the galactic order. Fleet status? He asked. All 10,000 ships report battle ready, sir, came the response from his weapons officer. Plasma cannons charged, shields at full power, fighters prepared for launch. We could level their entire world in less than 1 standard hour if needed. That won't be necessary, Kethvar said firmly. The Empire needs workers, not graveyards. We'll follow standard procedure. Approach their world, demonstrate our power, and accept their surrender. If they're reasonable, we can have them integrated into the Empire within a local year. The tactical display showed the fleet beginning to move inward toward Earth. The ships moved in perfect formation, a testament to centuries of military precision. Each captain knew exactly where to position their vessel, how to coordinate with neighboring ships, and when to fire if combat became necessary. As the fleet advanced, more details about the human system became clear. There were indeed several space stations orbiting Earth, though they were laughably small compared to Imperial standards. A few bases on the 4th planet, which the humans called Mars, appeared to be research facilities. Some asteroid mining operations were scattered throughout the system, but they looked more like automated equipment than actual bases. Sir, we're receiving some electromagnetic transmissions from the human installations, reported Communications Officer Thelvar. Appears to be standard chatter between their facilities. Nothing that suggests they've detected us yet. Kethvar found this amusing but not surprising. Human sensor technology was so primitive, they probably couldn't detect the fleet until it was practically on top of their planet. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be far too late to mount any kind of defense. "How long until we reach optimal demonstration range?" he asked. 6 standard hours at current speed, sir," replied the navigation officer. "Excellent. Begin broadcasting the standard surrender demand in all major galactic languages. Make sure they understand that resistance is futile and that the Empire offers them the chance to join galactic civilization peacefully." The communications officer began preparing the message that had been sent to nearly 1,000 worlds before Earth. It was a simple ultimatum: surrender immediately and accept integration into the Empire, or face complete destruction. Most species chose surrender once they saw the size of the fleet sent to conquer them. Kethavar walked back to his command chair and settled into the comfortable seat. This would be another routine conquest. The humans would panic when they saw the fleet. Their leaders would argue among themselves for a few hours, and then they would inevitably surrender rather than face annihilation. Within a few local years, Earth would be just another Imperial world, its people working to support the greater glory of the Empire. He thought about his own career as the fleet continued its advance. 300 conquered worlds, dozens of different species brought into the Imperial fold. Countless primitive civilizations shown the benefits of advanced technology and proper organization. It was satisfying work, bringing order to the chaos of unexplored space. The Admiral looked at the tactical display again. Soon they would be close enough to Earth for the humans to detect them, with even their primitive sensors. That's when the real show would begin. First would come panic as humanity realized they were no longer alone in the universe. Then fear as they understood the size of the force sent to conquer them. Finally, hopefully, would come wisdom as they accepted that resistance was impossible. "Sir, we should be within their detection range shortly," announced the sensor officer. "Good," Kethavar replied. "Prepare to broadcast our demands on all frequencies once they make contact, and make sure our formation looks appropriately impressive. Sometimes the visual impact is just as important as the actual firepower." The 10,000 ships of the Imperial fleet continued their approach toward the small blue world, confident in their overwhelming superiority and certain of their inevitable victory. After all, what could one primitive planet possibly do against the might of an empire that spanned half the galaxy? First contact goes wrong. The Imperial fleet had crossed the orbit of the 8th planet when the first human transmission reached them. Communications officer Thelvar looked up from his console with confusion written across his scaled features. "Sir, we're receiving a response from the humans," he reported to Admiral Kethavar. "Already?" Kethavar raised 2 of his eyebrows. "We haven't even sent our surrender demand yet." "What are they saying?" Thelvar consulted his displays, looking puzzled. "It's strange, sir. They're asking us to identify ourselves and state our intentions. The transmission is coming from something called Terran Defense Command rather than their planetary government." "Terran Defense Command?" Kethavar repeated. "Our intelligence reports made no mention of any unified military organization. These humans were supposed to be divided into hundreds of competing nation-states." "That's what our files say, sir," confirmed intelligence officer Vethron from his station. "Perhaps they formed some kind of temporary alliance when they detected our fleet." Kethavar considered this. It wasn't unusual for primitive worlds to attempt some kind of unified response when faced with Imperial conquest. It never made any difference in the end, but it sometimes made the initial negotiations more efficient to deal with one government instead of dozens. "Send our standard surrender demand," he ordered. "All 47 languages, full diplomatic protocols. Make it clear that resistance is futile, and that the Empire offers them membership in galactic civilization." The transmission went out across all frequencies, a carefully crafted message that had been refined through hundreds of conquests. It explained the benefits of joining the Empire, the technological advances that would be shared, and the protection that would be offered. It also made very clear what would happen to worlds that chose to resist. The response came back within minutes, much faster than most worlds managed. Again, it came from this mysterious Terran Defense Command. "Sir," Thelvar said, his voice carrying a note of bewilderment, "they're declining." "Declining?" Kethavar asked. "Yes, sir. They acknowledge our message but politely refuse our offer. They're requesting that we withdraw from their system immediately." A ripple of surprised laughter went through the bridge crew. Commander Yethlos shook his head in amazement. "Politely refuse? Do they not understand what they're facing?" Kethavar studied the tactical display. 10,000 Imperial warships against a world with chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons. Either these humans were completely insane, or they didn't truly comprehend the situation they were in. Perhaps they need a demonstration, he decided. Target one of their outer installations. Something large enough to be impressive but not vital to their survival. Show them what our weapons can do. The weapons officer identified a large mining complex in the asteroid belt, between the 4th and 5th planets. It appeared to house several hundred humans and would make an excellent example of Imperial firepower without being crucial to Earth's survival. Firing plasma cannons, announced weapons officer. Kreltar.3 Imperial destroyers turned toward the mining station and opened fire. Brilliant beams of superheated plasma lanced across space, striking the human facility. The installation vanished in a brief flash of light, completely vaporized by weapons that could melt through a kilometer of solid steel. Transmission sent to Earth, reported Thelvar. Full sensor records of the destruction, along with a reminder that this is what awaits them if they continue to resist. Kethavar expected the usual response to such demonstrations. Panic. Desperate pleas for mercy. Immediate surrender. Instead, what came back was even more bewildering than the first transmission. Sir, Thelvar said slowly. They're apologizing for the loss of life at the mining station, and they're asking us again to please reconsider and leave peacefully. Apologizing? Kethavar couldn't hide his confusion. They're apologizing to us? Yes, sir. The message says they regret that we felt the need to take hostile action, and they hope we'll choose to withdraw rather than force them to take defensive measures. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of the ship's systems. In 300 years of conquests, Kethavar had never encountered a response like this. Fear, anger, desperation, these were normal. But polite requests for the invading force to leave? That was completely unprecedented. Defensive measures? Commander Yethlos asked. What defensive measures? Our sensors show no military buildup, no fleet movements, no weapons charging. What could they possibly be planning? Intelligence Officer Vethran was frantically checking his databases. Sir, I'm reviewing all our surveillance data on this system. There's no indication they have anything that could threaten even our smallest escort ships. Their most powerful weapons are fusion bombs delivered by chemical rockets. Those couldn't even get through our point defense systems, let alone damage our shields. Kethavar stood and paced to the view screen. Earth was much closer now, a beautiful blue marble hanging in space. He could see the tiny glints of light that marked their orbital stations, pathetically small compared to Imperial space habitats. What were these humans thinking? Perhaps, he said slowly, they're simply in denial. Some species react to overwhelming force by retreating into fantasy. They convince themselves they have hidden weapons or secret allies coming to save them. That would explain the strange confidence in their transmissions, agreed Yethlos. Sir, interrupted the sensor officer. We're detecting increased communication traffic throughout the human system. All their installations are exchanging data, but we can't break their encryption. Encryption. Kethavar turned. They have encryption our systems can't break. Well, sir, it's not that we can't break it. We just haven't bothered to develop algorithms for such primitive mathematical systems. It would be like using our advanced tools to crack a child's puzzle. We'd need to dumb down our systems to match their level. That made sense. Imperial cryptography was designed to handle the mathematical sophistication of advanced civilizations. Trying to decode the crude ciphers of a primitive world would be like using a plasma cannon to crack nuts. Should I order our computer specialists to work on their codes? Asked Yethlos. Kethavar waved dismissively. Don't waste the effort. Whatever they're discussing, it won't matter. Probably their various governments arguing about whether to surrender immediately or try some hopeless last stand. The fleet continued its advance toward Earth. As they drew closer, more details became visible on the sensors. The human orbital stations were indeed tiny. The largest wouldn't even qualify as a shuttlecraft by Imperial standards. A few ships moved between Earth and its moon, but they were obviously civilian transports. Sir, another transmission from Terran Defense Command, reported Thelvar. What now? They're offering to negotiate. They say they understand we may have legitimate grievances with humanity, and they'd like to discuss a peaceful resolution to our differences. Kethavar actually laughed out loud. Grievances? Peaceful resolution? Do they think this is some kind of diplomatic dispute between equals? Should I respond, sir? Tell them, Kethvar said, settling back into his command chair, that the only negotiation possible is the terms of their surrender. They can submit now and be treated as valued citizens of the Empire, or they can resist and be conquered by force. Those are their only options. As the message went out, Kethvar reflected on how different this conquest was turning out to be. Most worlds either panicked immediately or tried to mount some kind of desperate defense. These humans seemed to be living in a fantasy where they had some kind of choice in the matter. Time to Earth orbit, he asked. 4 hours, sir. Excellent. Signal the fleet to assume standard planetary siege formation. Once we're in position above their world, they'll have no choice but to face reality. No species has ever continued to resist once they see 10,000 warships hanging over their home planet. The Imperial fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the small blue world, confident that this strange human delusion would soon be shattered by the cold reality of overwhelming force. The Trap Springs Admiral Kethvar was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease as the Imperial fleet passed the orbit of the fourth planet. What had started as a routine conquest was becoming increasingly strange, and the strangeness was accelerating with each passing hour. Sir, called Sensor Officer Drelkin from his station, I'm getting some unusual readings from the human installations. Define unusual, Kethvar replied, moving to look over the officer's shoulder at the sensor displays. Well, sir, remember those mining stations and research facilities we cataloged when we first entered the system? Their power signatures are changing. Changing how? Drelkin pointed to his screens where dozens of small dots representing human installations were scattered throughout the solar system. When we first detected them, they were running on what appeared to be basic fusion reactors, exactly what we'd expect from a primitive civilization. But now they're showing much higher energy outputs. Some of them are producing power levels that shouldn't be possible with fusion technology. Intelligence Officer Vethran hurried over to examine the readings. That's impossible. Our surveillance data clearly shows these humans haven't developed antimatter technology or zero-point energy systems. Where is all this power coming from? I don't know, sir, Drelkin admitted. But it gets stranger. Some of these installations that we classified as mining operations are now showing gravity signatures. Gravity signatures? Kethvar felt a cold sensation in his stomach. You mean artificial gravity? Yes, sir. Strong ones. Much stronger than anything our own technology can produce. Commander Yethlos joined the group around the sensor station. Could our initial scans have been wrong? Maybe we misidentified some of their installations. No, sir, Vethran said firmly. I've triple-checked our surveillance data. When we first arrived, these installations were producing exactly the energy signatures we'd expect from primitive mining equipment and research stations. Now they're putting out power readings that rival our own battleships. Kethvar stared at the display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As he watched, more of the small dots began changing color on the screen as their power outputs increased. What had been a handful of strangely powerful installations was rapidly becoming dozens. Could they be powering up some kind of weapons? Asked Yethlos. What weapons? Drelkin replied. Our scans show no plasma cannons, no missile batteries, no energy projectors. All we're detecting is massive power generation and these gravity fields. Sir, interrupted Communications Officer Thelvar, we're receiving another transmission from Terran Defense Command. What are they saying now? Kethvar asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. They're giving us a final warning, sir. They're asking us one more time to withdraw immediately, or they say they'll be forced to take defensive action. Defensive action with what? Kethvar snapped. We've scanned this entire system. They have nothing that could threaten a single escort ship, let alone the entire Imperial fleet. But even as he said it, he was watching more installations throughout the solar system power up to impossible energy levels. The sensor display was beginning to look like a constellation of stars as human facilities that had appeared dead or barely active suddenly blazed with power that shouldn't exist. Sir, Drelkin called out urgently. I'm detecting massive power spikes near Earth itself. Those orbital stations we thought were simple habitats or communications relays, they're lighting up like miniature suns. Kethvar rushed back to the main view screen. Earth was much closer now, close enough that they could make out details of the human orbital installations. What he saw made no sense. The tiny stations that had appeared barely capable of supporting a few hundred people were now surrounded, by energy fields that registered as clearly artificial, but unlike anything in Imperial databases. Could this be some kind of bluff? Yethlos wondered aloud. Maybe they're overloading their reactors to create impressive sensor readings, hoping to scare us away. If they overload fusion reactors like that, they'll destroy themselves, Vethron pointed out. Maybe that's their plan, Kethvar said grimly. A civilization-wide suicide rather than accept conquest. We've encountered that before, though usually not until after the actual fighting starts. But the readings weren't consistent with reactors about to explode. These were controlled, stable energy outputs at levels that should be impossible for human technology to achieve. And they were spreading throughout the system like some kind of coordinated awakening. Sir, new contacts, Drelkin suddenly announced. Ships decloaking near Earth. The main screen shifted to show space around the human homeworld. Where moments before there had been only empty space and a few small civilian transports, now there were shapes. Large shapes that hadn't been there before. How many ships? Kethvar demanded. I'm not sure, sir. The sensor returns are unlike anything I've ever seen. They're not showing up as solid matter. But there's definitely something there. Something big. As the Imperial fleet drew closer, the shapes became clearer, and what Kethvar saw sent ice through his veins. These weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were geometric forms that seemed to bend light around them. Structures that appeared to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else entirely. Sir, Vethran called out, his voice tight with concern, I need to report something. I've been reviewing our initial intelligence on this system, and I think we may have made a serious error. What kind of error? The electromagnetic signals we detected from Earth. The ones that convinced us they were primitive. I think they might have been deliberate false broadcasts. Kethvar turned to stare at the intelligence officer. False broadcasts? You mean they were deliberately making themselves appear less advanced than they actually are? It would explain everything we're seeing now, sir. If they have technology advanced enough to fake primitive EM signatures, they could have been hiding their true capabilities this entire time. The implications of this hit Kethvar like a physical blow. If the humans had been deliberately concealing their technology, then everything the Empire thought it knew about Earth was wrong. The primitive chemical rockets, the basic fusion power, the simple orbital habitats, all of it could be an elaborate deception. Sir, the human installations throughout the system are now all running at maximum power, Drelkin reported, and I'm detecting some kind of field effect spreading outward from each location. What kind of field? Unknown, sir. It's not electromagnetic, not gravitational, not any kind of energy field in our databases. But it's expanding rapidly, and wherever it passes, space itself seems to be changing. On the view screen, they could see it now with their own eyes. Reality itself appeared to be rippling outward from the human installations like waves in a pond. The distortions were subtle but clearly visible, and they were spreading throughout the solar system at incredible speed. Sir, Thelvar announced, final transmission from Terran Defense Command. They're saying, final warning. Withdraw immediately or face defensive action. We do not wish to harm you, but we will protect our home. Kethvar looked at the tactical display, where 10,000 Imperial warships were shown approaching a world that was rapidly revealing itself to be something completely different from what they had expected. The sensor readings were now showing energy outputs throughout the human system that rivaled entire Imperial starbases. Could this all be an illusion? Yethlos asked desperately. Some kind of sensor trick to make us think they're more powerful than they really are? But Kethvar was studying the displays with the experience of 300 conquests, and what he saw there terrified him. The power readings were real. The gravity distortions were real. The strange ships appearing around Earth were real. Somehow, impossibly, humanity had been hiding technology that made the Imperial fleet look primitive by comparison. Sir, Drelkin called out urgently, the field effects are reaching our position. Whatever those humans are doing, it's about to affect our ships directly. Kethvar looked at the approaching wave of spatial distortion and realized with growing horror that the Imperial fleet wasn't approaching a helpless, primitive world. They were flying straight into a trap that had been 300 years in the making. All ships, he commanded, prepare for emergency combat maneuvers. I have a terrible feeling we're about to discover just how badly we've underestimated these humans. The wave of distorted space reached the leading edge of the Imperial fleet, and reality itself began to change around them. Human technology unleashed. The first sign that everything had gone wrong came when 3 Imperial destroyers simply ceased to exist. "Report," Admiral Kethvar shouted as alarms began blaring throughout the bridge of the Eternal Glory. "Sir, the Valiant, Conqueror, and Star's Edge have vanished from sensors," Sensor Officer Drelkan replied, his voice shaking. "One moment they were there, the next, nothing. No explosion, no debris, no energy signature. They're just gone." "Gone how?" Commander Yethlos demanded. "I don't know, sir. The sensors show empty space where 3 destroyers used to be." On the main view screen, space around Earth was transforming. What had appeared to be small human orbital stations were revealing their true nature. Structures the size of moons unfolded from what sensors had registered as tiny habitats. The geometric shapes that had seemed like strange ships were expanding into massive platforms that dwarfed even the largest Imperial dreadnoughts. "Sir, incoming transmission from Terran Defense Command," reported Communications Officer Thelvar. "What are they saying?" They're apologizing, sir. They say they regret that we refused their peaceful warnings, and they're asking our surviving ships to power down weapons and prepare for escort to the edge of the system." "Surviving ships?" Kethvar repeated. "What do they mean, surviving ships?" His answer came in the form of more vessels simply vanishing from the tactical display. Not destroyed. Destroyed ships left wreckage and energy signatures. These ships were disappearing as if they had never existed at all. "Sir, the humans are powering up some kind of weapons," Weapons Officer Kreltar announced. "But I've never seen energy signatures like these. They're not plasma, not antimatter, not anything in our databases. Can we target them?" "I'm trying, sir, but our targeting systems can't lock onto anything. The human platforms appear to exist in normal space, but our sensors can't get a solid reading on their actual positions." Through the view screen, they could see beams of something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite energy lancing out from the human positions. When these beams touched Imperial ships, the vessels didn't explode or break apart. They seemed to fold in on themselves, compressing into points of impossible density before disappearing entirely. "Gravity weapons," breathed Intelligence Officer Vethran. "They're using controlled gravity to compress our ships into singularities." "That's impossible," Yethlos protested. "Gravity manipulation on that scale requires technology we don't even have theoretical models for. Tell that to the 50 ships we've lost in the last 2 minutes." Kethavar replied grimly. More human weapons revealed themselves. Streams of particles that seemed to phase Imperial vessels out of normal spacetime. Energy fields that trapped entire squadrons in what appeared to be temporal loops. The same ships repeating the same maneuvers over and over again in accelerated time. Projectiles that moved through Imperial shields as if they weren't there, striking with the force of small planets. "Sir, the Devastator is reporting that their main engines have been replaced with flowers," Thelvar announced in bewilderment. "Flowers?" "Yes, sir. According to Captain Zrelvar, his engineering section has been transformed into some kind of garden. The crew is unharmed, but the ship is now completely immobile and producing oxygen at an alarming rate." Kethavar stared at the communications officer. In 300 years of warfare, he had never heard anything so absurd. "Are you telling me the humans have weapons that turn starship engines into plants?" "It appears so, sir. More ships were disappearing from the tactical display with each passing moment. Some vanished entirely. Some were compressed into microscopic points. Some were trapped in temporal anomalies. And others were apparently being transformed into things that defied all logic. The Imperial fleet, which had entered the system confident of easy victory, was being systematically dismantled by weapons that operated on principles Imperial science couldn't even recognize. "Return fire," Kethvar ordered desperately. "All ships maximum firepower." The surviving Imperial vessels opened up with everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt continents fired at the human positions. Antimatter torpedoes capable of destroying cities streaked through space. Energy beams that had shattered the defenses of 1,000 worlds lanced toward Earth. None of it made any difference. The plasma beams struck some kind of barriers around the human positions and simply stopped, their energy absorbed without any visible effect. The antimatter torpedoes reached a certain distance from the human platforms and then began flying backward, retracing their paths to explode harmlessly in empty space. The energy weapons hit defensive fields that seemed to bend the attacks into other dimensions entirely. "Sir, our weapons are having no effect whatsoever," Kreltar reported. "Their defensive systems are operating on principles our technology can't interact with." "What about our shields?" Kethvar asked. even as he watched more ships disappear from his fleet. Completely useless, sir. The human weapons are passing through our shields like they don't exist. Whatever they're using, it doesn't interact with our defensive systems at all. A new type of human weapon revealed itself, streams of energy that struck Imperial ships and caused them to begin moving in reverse through time. Kethavar watched in horror as the battleship Mighty Sword was hit by one of these beams and began undoing everything it had done in the last hour. The ship backed away from its position, its crew presumably experiencing their recent actions in reverse order, until it reached the point where it had first entered the system and then simply faded from existence. Sir, casualty reports are coming in from throughout the fleet, Yethalos announced, his voice hollow. We've lost 60% of our forces in less than 10 minutes. The remaining ships are reporting weapon systems offline, engines failing, and in some cases their hulls are being converted into what appears to be crystalline structures. How is this possible? Kethavar demanded. How can one primitive world have technology this advanced? His answer came from Terran Defense Command. The human voice that came over the communication system was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying in its casual tone. Imperial Fleet, this is Terran Defense Command. We strongly advise your remaining vessels to power down all weapons and prepare to be escorted from our system. We have no wish to destroy you entirely, but we will defend our home with whatever force is necessary. Who are you? Kethavar found himself asking. What are you? We are exactly what we appear to be. Humans defending our world. We detected your empire's expansion several centuries ago and took appropriate precautions. The signals you intercepted from our world were designed to make us appear less advanced than we actually are. We prefer to be left alone to develop in peace. The Empire will not stand for this. When word of this defeat reaches Imperial Command, they will send a fleet 10 times larger to crush you. There was a pause before the human voice responded, and when it did, there was something that might have been pity in the tone. Admiral, you're operating under a false assumption. You believe your empire is the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. It isn't. You've been expanding into regions of space populated by young species because encounters with truly advanced civilizations would have ended your expansion centuries ago. We've been watching your progress and allowing it to continue because you generally treat conquered worlds reasonably well. But Earth is under our protection. The implications of this statement hit Kethavar like a physical blow. If the humans were right, if the Empire had been unknowingly confined to a region of space populated by primitive worlds, then everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization was wrong. Final warning, Admiral, the human voice continued. Power down your weapons and prepare for escort, or we will be forced to disable your remaining ships. We've been as gentle as possible so far, but our patience has limits. Kethavar looked at his tactical display. Of the 10,000 ships that had entered the system, fewer than 4,000 remained, and those survivors were completely helpless against human technology that operated on principles Imperial science couldn't even comprehend. The greatest military force in Imperial history had been effortlessly crushed by a single world that preferred to be left alone. Aftermath and revelation. The silence on the bridge of the eternal glory was broken only by the soft humming of life support systems and the occasional beep of status monitors. Admiral Kethavar sat in his command chair, staring at a tactical display that told the story of the most complete military defeat in Imperial history. Of the 10,000 ships that had entered the Sol system with such confidence, only 300 remained intact and functional. Sir, Communications Officer Thelvar said quietly, Terran Defense Command is asking for our response to their escort offer. Kethavar closed his 4 eyes and tried to process what had happened. In less than 30 minutes, humanity had demonstrated technology so advanced that the Imperial fleet might as well have been throwing rocks. Ships that could manipulate gravity, bend time, phase matter out of existence, and operate on principles that Imperial science couldn't even recognize. It wasn't just a defeat. It was proof that everything the Empire thought it knew about the galaxy was wrong. Tell them, Kethavar said finally, that we accept their terms. All remaining Imperial vessels will power down weapons and submit to escort. Yes, sir. As the message went out, Kethavar reflected on his career. 300 conquered worlds. 3 centuries of expansion. Countless species brought into the Imperial fold through superior technology and overwhelming force. All of it based on the assumption that the Empire was the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. "Sir, the human escort vessels are approaching," Sensor Officer Drelkin reported. On the main view screen, shapes emerged from the space around Earth. They didn't look like ships in any conventional sense, more like geometric forms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As they approached, the remaining Imperial vessels found themselves surrounded by craft that defied every principle of engineering and physics the Empire understood. "Admiral," came the calm voice of Terran Defense Command, "we're going to escort your surviving ships to the edge of our system. During the journey, we'll be transmitting some information we think your leadership should have. Consider it a gift of perspective." "What kind of information?" Kethvar asked. "The truth about the galaxy you think you rule." The journey to the system's edge took 6 hours. During that time, the human vessels maintained perfect formation around the remnants of the Imperial fleet, their impossible technology making it clear that resistance would be pointless. But it was the data transmissions that truly shattered Kethvar's understanding of reality. The humans shared star charts that showed the true scope of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Empire, which had thought itself the master of half the galaxy, was revealed to control less than 1% of inhabited space. The region they had been expanding through was essentially a nursery area, a section of space set aside for young civilizations to develop without interference from truly advanced species. "You see, Admiral," the human voice explained as the data flowed to Imperial computers, "your empire has been expanding through what we call the development zone. It's an area of space where advanced civilizations allow younger species to grow and learn without interference. Your conquest of primitive worlds has been tolerated because, generally speaking, you've governed them reasonably well." The star chart showed the locations of dozens of civilizations that made humanity look primitive by comparison. Species that had transcended physical existence entirely, beings that could manipulate matter and energy on galactic scales, civilizations that had been exploring the universe while the first Imperial worlds were still covered in ice. "Why?" Kethvar found himself asking. "Why show us this? Why not just destroy us and be done with it?" "Because destruction accomplishes nothing productive," came the reply. "Your empire serves a purpose in galactic civilization. You bring order to chaotic regions. You provide a stepping stone for primitive worlds to join the broader community. And you generally treat your subjects well. We have no interest in destroying something that works." More data flowed to the Imperial computers. Information about trade networks that spanned the galaxy. Diplomatic protocols between species so advanced, their technology appeared indistinguishable from magic. Cultural exchange programs between civilizations that had been exploring space for millions of years. "But understand this, Admiral," the human voice continued. "Earth and its colonies are under the protection of the Galactic Council. Any aggressive action against us or our allies will result in the complete dissolution of your empire. Not destruction, dissolution. Your worlds would be returned to their pre-imperial status. Your technology would be reverted to pre-spaceflight levels, and your species would be confined to your home system until you learn to interact peacefully with your neighbors." Intelligence Officer Vethron was studying the incoming data with growing amazement. "Sir, according to these files, humanity isn't even considered particularly advanced by galactic standards. They're classified as a moderately developed species with potential for growth." "If they're only moderately developed," Commander Yethlos asked, "what are the truly advanced species capable of?" Their answer came in the form of sensor readings from the edge of the solar system. As the Imperial escort reached the boundary of human space, the sensors detected a presence that dwarfed even the massive human installations around. Earth, something vast beyond comprehension, was waiting in the darkness between stars. Structure so large it could have been mistaken for a moon, but clearly artificial. "That's a monitoring station operated by the Watchers," the human voice explained casually. "They've been observing your empire's expansion for the last few centuries. Generally, they only intervene if a young species becomes genuinely dangerous to galactic stability." Kethvar stared at the readings. The structure was generating power levels that exceeded the total output of entire Imperial sectors. Its technology was so advanced that Imperial sensors could barely detect it, let alone analyze it. If beings capable of building such things had been watching the Empire's expansion, Then every Imperial conquest had taken place under the eyes of entities that could have stopped them with a thought. "Why are you telling us all this?" he asked. "Because knowledge brings wisdom, and wisdom prevents conflicts," the human replied. "Your empire can continue to exist and even prosper, but only if you understand your true place in the galactic community. You govern primitive worlds because more advanced species allow you to do so. You expand into new regions because those regions have been cleared for development. You are not conquerors, you are gardeners, tending a small plot in a vast garden you never knew existed." As the escort reached the edge of the system, the human vessels began to withdraw. But before they departed entirely, one final transmission came through. "Admiral, we're going to allow a small number of your ships to return to Imperial space to carry word of what happened here. The rest of your vessels will be repurposed. We have need of ships for various humanitarian missions throughout the galaxy, and your crews will be given the choice to serve on them or be returned home." "Repurposed how?" Kethavar asked. "Your weapons will be replaced with medical equipment, food synthesizers, and educational systems. Your warships will become hospital ships, supply vessels, and mobile schools. They'll serve the same function your empire serves, helping primitive worlds develop and grow. But without the conquest and subjugation, the reality of the situation finally settled over Kethavar completely. The Imperial fleet hadn't just been defeated, it had been conscripted into a cause it never knew existed. The Empire's expansion hadn't been conquest. It had been gardening on a scale they never comprehended. "One final piece of advice, Admiral," the human voice said as the escort ships prepared to depart. "When you report back to Imperial Command, tell them exactly what you experienced here. Don't minimize it. Don't try to make it sound less devastating than it was. The truth is the only thing that will prevent them from making an even bigger mistake in the future." As the human vessels disappeared into the darkness around Earth, Kethavar was left with the remains of the once mighty Imperial fleet, and the knowledge that everything he had believed about the galaxy was fundamentally wrong. The Empire hadn't been expanding across the galaxy. They had been playing in a sandbox while adults watched from a distance. The small convoy of surviving Imperial ships began their journey back to Imperial space, carrying news that would reshape the political structure of their civilization forever. Behind them, Earth continued its quiet existence, a small blue world that preferred to be left alone, but was protected by powers beyond Imperial comprehension. The galaxy, it turned out, was a much larger and more complex place than the Empire had ever imagined. And humanity was just one small part of a community that spanned the stars, a community that had been watching and waiting to see if the young species in the development zone would ever be ready to join the broader conversation of galactic civilization. The Imperial fleet's defeat marked not the end of an empire, but the beginning of its education about the true nature of the universe it inhabited.